There I'm John Kane, and I welcome you to Let's Talk Native on this Saturday, April 18th, 2020. While this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do encourage and in some cases start conversations. We kind of break the rules here for Native Radio. We don't do prayers or buffalo speeches or get all mystic. We take a tough look at our history, oppression, and survival. We talk about culture, the arts, politics, and identity, and we may step on a few toes along the way. But our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We'll take on the false narratives and provide critical thinking to all that's heaped upon us, and we do it all right here live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. So let's talk Native. But first, let me remind folks that our audio streams live on our website, which is www.letstalknative.com. Our video streams live on Facebook via Facebook Live on our Facebook group page and many others. We take the audio and we put it up on SoundCloud, which puts it up on your favorite podcast platform. And we take the video and we put it up on our YouTube channel. So if you listen to us live, that's great. But if you want to listen to us on demand, you can do that either through a podcast or through our YouTube videos. So I encourage you to subscribe to our podcast on our YouTube videos. We produce videos that are not just our radio shows, and you can take a look at those. And those are usually short-form videos that can be used just as discussion starters as well. So, look, I'm the host and producer of the show. I'm joined here in studio by Jake Proud, who's managing our audio and our video. And well, let's just get into it. So, it has really only been 1 month since the travel restrictions, the stay-at-home orders, businesses closing down to essential businesses. It's only been a month. I know people are feeling like this has been going on forever. I share in the sentiment that March felt like the longest month ever. I'm not sure that April seems to be dragging as long as March has. But again, it's only been a month. I mean, it was March 16th. Was usually for most places was the first day of some of these stay-at-home orders and businesses closing officially. I mean, some had closed before that, but schools were still in the process of hashing that out and sorting that out. So it's only been a month, but some people are really, really cracking under the pressure. Across the United States, and I don't even know about Canada at this point, but certainly across many states in the United States, major cities, and I'm talking about Michigan, Ohio, Minnesota, California, Texas, Virginia, again, East Coast and West Coast going all the way across. I mean, there are people who are really just saying they need to fight their state to have their states opened up. They're carrying, wearing MAGA hats and Trump banners. Somehow they're equating opening up the states immediately with supporting Trump. Although Trump hasn't really, jumped fully into that mix yet. I mean, it's just a matter of time, I'm afraid. But a lot of these guys are carrying weapons. They feel like they got to not only protest their First Amendment, they got to bring their rifles to associate this thing with gun rights as well. They're wearing their MAGA hats and their "Don't Tread Me" flags and "Tread on Me" flags, all of that stuff. I mean, they're making it sound like that they have been imprisoned because they're being asked to stay home. I don't know how bad your families are that you feel this like crazy over having to spend time with your families, but this is the political right and the evangelical right too. I listened to a bunch of these protesters. No, God, we're in God's hands. It doesn't matter that we don't have to have our liberties taken away. God's going to take care of us. So you got this like evangelical side of this thing, and there are churches who are actually suing some states for telling them they can't hold group worship and all that other stuff. It's crazy, folks. I mean, and then just listening to some of these folks. And look, if you want to go to a crowd and violate the social distancing recommendations and the essential travel and all of that stuff, what you do to yourself is one thing, but when you go back home and you start infecting other people, especially elderly people, and Jake and I were discussing, I've thought most of the people that I saw were middle aged anyway. But Jake was saying no, there were a lot of gray hairs in there, so there were a lot of older people who are probably more at risk. And I have to admit, when I do go out and I go to a store or whatever, I'm seeing a lot of elderly people. Funny, I can't believe that there aren't people who are concerned enough about their parents and their grandparents that they won't shop for them. Why would you subject? And maybe, maybe it isn't about subjecting them to this. Maybe you just can't contain that age group. They are, this idea of what liberty really is something that, or freedom is something that Americans have this twisted idea of what life and liberty really are. And there's no sense of community. I mean, if you show up at a protest rally and a bunch of you wearing MAGA hats, that doesn't make you a community, especially if you don't really, give a rat's ass about anybody else except for yourself. If you're only there to fight for your right to, I don't know, to get a haircut, that was the one thing. Oh, you open up hair parlors. We need hair salons opened. Well, obviously, that's not a big issue for me, obviously. But no, I mean, I'm watching this stuff and I'm thinking, man, these people are crazy. And most of them are white people, so I know people don't like the whole race thing, but I'm sorry, most of those white folks are crazy. I'm not saying there weren't a few people of color in the mix. In fact, I saw a couple of people of color wearing MAGA hats, and I'm still not quite understanding that one. But so I say all this as this, all this stay-at-home order stuff is really unraveling, among certain groups of people. I'm not saying it's the vast majority. I mean, obviously these are protests, and there's a couple of hundred. I think the biggest one I saw maybe had 500 people at it. So, but it's not a lot. But there's the media covering it. The media is propping up, and it's not just Fox and Breitbart that are covering this stuff. I mean, it's getting a lot of coverage. And I'm going to tell you, at some point, Trump is going to start rallying with these folks. I mean, he's going to start showing up at these things. I guarantee one of the first big public things you're going to see is going to be a Trump rally. And it's going to be one of these swing states that he thinks that he's going to electrify the base, who is now frustrated with having to stay home for a month. And that's the way it's going to play out. Now, and the interesting thing is, so while this is happening across states, across the United States, native territories are actually tightening the restrictions. Tonawanda Senecas out here are going to, they're shutting down all the shops, the smoke shops. They're all closing next week. Here in Seneca territory, there's essentially, effectively a curfew that has been ordered. Visitors on Seneca territory are asked to leave by 7:30 each evening. Businesses are supposed to close down at 8 o'clock unless you're an essential business. And yes, I do regard ourselves as essential businesses. That's why we're here. In Tuscarora, I think they shut things down and they close it off. I think there are people patrolling, from what I understand, to try to, shut down some of the traffic going through the territories in the evening. So while native territories, because a couple of infections have occurred on our territories, are tightening up, justifiably or unjustifiably. It's interesting that the exact opposite is happening in some of these other communities. Now, it's also interesting that it is a lot of the swing states, or the states that you're going to have a lot of this evangelical right and a Trump cult atmosphere in them. Excuse me. But it is interesting that you see more and more of that. And like I said, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. As I mentioned on the one of my last shows, Dr. Tony Fauci and this Dr. Burks, they adjusted what they figured was going to be the total of deaths caused by this. They adjusted their prediction down. The early prediction, the earliest prediction was real high, but then by the time these guys were doing these media events with Trump, they started saying, well, we expect there will be loss of life between 100 and 200,000 people. Well, last week, for whatever reason, they said, we now think it's going to be significantly less than that. And they put a number at about 60,000. Now, here's the problem with that. It's like 40,000. It's like 39,000 right now. Tomorrow, it'll be over 40,000 people passed away on this. In 10 days, because they're averaging about 2,000, actually over 2,000 people a day dying, they're going to be at 60,000 people in 10 days. They're going to be at 100,000 people in a month, or over 100,000 people in a month. And there's no, for all the talk about, the apex and flattening the curve, look, if you just get your curve to flatten, that doesn't mean it went down. It means that you reached the top and you're staying there. And that's kind of where the U.S. is right now. Look, they're still adding about 30,000 new cases a day. And they're adding about, on average, for the last 11 days, they've averaged over 2,000 deaths per day. So, they're almost at 750,000 people. They're almost at, let's see. So there's 738,000 cases. They're averaging about 30,000 new cases a day, and the deaths are at 39,000. So that's only a month into this, travel, restriction and stay at home stuff. Now, I don't know how, I've said it before, I'm not sure how this thing ends. I don't know what the game plan and what the criterion is to determine when you start easing restrictions. But I'm pretty sure you don't wait until you get to the peak, and when you're at the peak, that's when you loosen things up. And that's where everything's at. It is really bizarre. While you're at the highest level of cases per day and deaths per day, that you begin the process of loosening the restrictions. If you had any idea about what the restrictions were supposed to do, you certainly wouldn't relax them while you're experiencing the highest rates of everything. I mean, it's bizarre to even think about the fact that Trump, is trying to lay out the process. I mean, and of course he backed down from saying that he's the one who's going to open up every state, that he is the ultimate authority, to now saying that he's giving the states authority. Make no mistake about it. He didn't give the states the authority. The states already have the authority to either shut things down or not shut things down. Now, look, I think there are some things that the states did that they didn't have to do. I think there's like state forests and hiking trails and even some of the marina stuff that doesn't really make sense to me personally, because I don't see these things as creating social distancing problems that much. I mean, if you're hiking on a trail, you're not hiking within 6 feet of somebody. I mean, that's not a hike. So I don't know. There's some things that I don't fully understand. Apparently in New York State, I heard, and I don't know this for sure, but they've authorized private golf clubs to open up, not public ones. So if you pay your $40,000 or $50,000 or $100,000 or $200,000 a year for your country club membership, you're no longer going to be restricted. You can go there and golf. But if you want to go play at the public golf course, not yet. Golf seems like a pretty open thing to me. Granted, you might have to have one person per cart or walk. Heaven forbid, right? You'd have to walk and carry your bags. But I don't know. There's some things that I don't fully understand. And I'm not even sure if the whole flattening the curve thing has a long-term game to it. I don't know what the strategy is long-term, because again, at what point do you start to open things up? How far down the curve after you have reached the apex and you start to go down? At what point do you open things up? Because I guarantee you, there's going to be a spike now. I mean, just based on even these morons that were out protesting, today and a little bit yesterday, you're going to see a bit of a spike. And the more things are relaxed, and it's not, I'm not saying this because I'm trying to be prophetic. I mean, Singapore went through this thing, Japan went through this thing. If you look back at the historical record, back with the Spanish flu, the same thing happened. There was a loosening of restrictions, and then they had Actually, the second wave was bigger than the first wave because they loosened restrictions too early. And I get it. You know, Trump is worried that his presidency's on the line here. November is not that far away. If he can't get, you know, some trajectory for the economy heading back to where he thinks it was, which was, you know, which he thinks was great, he knows that he's sunk. So if he has to wait, you know, several more months before things can really start to open up, you know, and shame on the average quote unquote American who many people are getting paid. Some people are getting paid more not to work than when they were working. And it's funny listening to Trump talk about China manipulating their currency and doing all this. Well, what the hell do you think the United States did when it started printing money just to prop up the stock market, or to start printing money? And they're not even really printing money, but to adding money to the economy just so they can send stimulus checks out to everybody. There's a long-term downside to that. It's called inflation, you know, and it's called the potential collapse of the economy. What's happened thus far hasn't really been a collapse of the economy. It's been a shutdown of the economy. And there's a difference. The difference between an economy collapsing and one that is just literally closed down. A collapsed economy means all of the confidence, all of the consumer confidence, all of the confidence in what a dollar is worth goes away. That hasn't happened yet. So this idea of an economic collapse, that hasn't happened yet. And I'll admit I'm a little surprised. You know, I almost thought there would be this like run on banks and that kind of stuff. But of course, they can't really have a run on banks as long as you got the federal government trying to do direct deposit into banks. And because people aren't necessarily pulling currency out, they're still using your ATM cards and that kind of stuff, their bank cards and their credit cards. You know, it makes a collapse. It actually makes a collapse pretty easy, you know, because everything is electronic. But it really is concerning, and when you get to the point here where maybe things have reached a ceiling, I don't even know that they have. I don't know if this apex or this flattening the curve is more associated with the limitation on testing, because again, all of these numbers, all the numbers the ones that I rattle off every show, are really based on people who have been tested. And it's still only 1%, 1.1% of the U.S. population has been tested. And based on those tests, that's how they're coming up with the number of cases, the number of deaths, and all of that stuff. 1.1%. And they can only test so fast. You know, one of the big battles between, you know, Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York, and Donald Trump has been over testing issues. Because it's really difficult for states to press companies to create testing. That's something the United States can do, the federal government can do. And right now, there isn't enough testing. One of the big issues is nursing homes. I mean, and so here's where the elderly are, and they're the most vulnerable. In fact, in many cases, some of the biggest pockets of death from the coronavirus has happened in nursing homes. It started out in Washington State. Seattle had their first one. That's when most of their loss of life came from nursing home infections. So how do you avoid that? So, well, the way you avoid it is first you test everybody, and then you test all the staff. And you know what? You got to continue to test the staff. You've got to make sure that the people who are tending to the elderly are not infected. You have to cut off visits. But they still can't even test. They don't have the capability. In New York State, and this is what I was listening to Cuomo talk about this. They don't have the capability to test not only on a regular basis, but even initially give tests to all of the employees that work at nursing homes. They've started to put those numbers up separately, the nursing home deaths, because it's become a real singular issue in terms of how many people have been infected in these nursing homes. I mean, and this is why I've said one of the biggest issues here is how do you protect the most vulnerable people? And the most vulnerable people are the elderly and anybody with underlying conditions. And the elderly is, you know, people my age and older, 60 and above. although many of us who are 60 and above who don't have underlying conditions are not in as much risk as people our age or even younger with underlying conditions. So, but this is the concern. So, look, if you want to go out and raise hell about Ohio opening up the state or Texas or anybody place else, that's fine. But if you're going to go, if you're doing that in public and then you're going to go work into a workspace where, because you're an essential employee or you're going to go home and visit with grandma, look, you may have think that, I'm willing to, risk my life to fight for freedom. Yeah, but are you willing to risk the lives of everybody around you? So there has to be a different standard for how you deal with how we treat the elderly. And, and of course I say that as a Native person who there clearly is a different relationship that Native people have with the elderly than non-Native people do. And I say that, and I know people can say, well, you say that and you sound pretty flippant when you say it. But we don't exactly throw our elderly into nursing homes at the rate that non-Native people do. So it's just not the way we do things. More often than not, we have a parent or a grandparent living in our homes. We do have senior living, and some of that, but it's right within the community. It's not like off someplace. So we have a different relationship with the elderly, and frankly, we value the knowledge and because culture is such an important part to Native people. We have a different value that we place on things like language and experience, some of what the elders went through, even some of the residential school experiences and all that stuff. Most of our generation we don't have that. And granted, that's it's trauma that they're handing down, but it's important that we know this stuff. So we value the elderly differently than other groups do, and but I don't think anybody, whether you hold the same values that Native people have or not, I don't think anybody wants to see their elderly loved ones exposed to risk. So, again, there has to be a different standard that we have for how nursing homes and elderly, whether it's elderly in your home or whether it's elderly in nursing homes, we just have to have different standards for how much we're going to allow them to have exposure to the outside while this is going on. Even if you don't support all of this shutdown stuff, there are ways you can do some things and kind of get things back to normal and still make sure that you protect a specific group of people. So I think that's an important thing, that has to be considered in all this. But like I said, it really does concern me. Now, one of the other things I wanted to mention, this was an interesting week because as much as there's been an attempt to overcome the rivalries and the egos that exist between politicians, not only Democrats versus Republicans, but even state versus federal. Some of that stuff really started to unravel this week a little bit too. While Andrew Cuomo was doing one of his media events, and every day he jumps on the television, and he does his in the morning, and then Trump does his in the evening, usually after 6 o'clock. But Andrew Cuomo does his in the morning before noon. So while Cuomo is doing his, Trump starts tweeting and almost antagonizing with his tweets what Cuomo's saying as he's saying it, and so Cuomo starts unleashing on Trump. Look, I'm not a big Cuomo fan personally. I'm not. But I got to say, I kind of rather enjoyed listening to him blast Donald Trump. Trump had said something to the effect in one of his tweets that, Cuomo should spend less time whining and more time doing his job. And so apparently Cuomo responded by saying, "Mr. President, if you're watching television, maybe it's time for you to get up off the couch and go to work." So there was kind of like that little going back and forth. But then it got more intense with that. And Cuomo started putting things in perspective in terms of Trump was arguing that Cuomo asked for more beds and ventilators than he needed. And so Cuomo flat out said, "Look, everything that I asked for was based on the predictions and the estimates that the CDC and the Trump's task force put out there. That's where he drew his predictions from. And of course, I even have a different take on whether there was really too many beds requested, by turning the Jacob Javits Center into a hospital, or sending the naval ship Comfort up there to to sit off one of the New York piers. I'm not convinced that those beds weren't really needed. I think they were needed. I just think that a lot of New Yorkers, after listening to 3 or 4 weeks, it constantly being pounded into them that the hospitals were experiencing chaos and that it was getting worse and worse and worse on a daily basis. I think many New Yorkers just said, look, we're not going to go to the hospital. For one thing, if you did end up being tested, and if you tested positive for COVID-19, you no longer were going to have your family around you anymore. You were going to be isolated, and I mean isolated with no family. If you need to be hospitalized, you were not going to have visitors anymore. So the day you went to the hospital might be the last day you saw your family, and so I think that's part of the reason that a lot of people didn't go to the hospital, and that's why you've seen an uptick in the number of people dying at home. And they're not dying at home because just purely out of choice. I think some of it had to do with hearing the constant drumbeat about how chaotic hospitals were and how much more chaotic they were going to be. I mean, that's a conclusion that I'm drawing here, because other than this COVID-19 really attacking people at home, people in New York do go to the hospital. I realize there's some groups that shy away from hospital treatment more than others, but they do go to the hospital. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention, and this is truly disturbing, I didn't realize that. I was talking to my daughter the other day, and she didn't realize that there's so much stuff on the internet that's fake, and that's there's all kinds of conspiracy theories out there. Some people claiming the whole thing is fraud and everything else. But there was a couple of drone videos and a couple of stories that were done on the mass burials taking place on Hart Island, off the near the Bronx, or part of the Bronx, I guess, in New York City. And so my daughter didn't realize that this was a real thing. I said, yeah, these are mass burials. And she said, that's crazy. I said, yeah, but you don't understand. There have been these. I mean, Hart Island has been used for, I think, like 151 years. And what it's been used for is when people die in New York City, and a lot of times it's homeless people, but it's people who have been unclaimed. When a person dies and nobody claims their body, they get buried at Hart Island. The difference is that the uptick has been huge. So now they got to bring a bulldozer in there and bulldoze a whole trench, and then you start lining up, end to end with makeshift coffins or boxes anyway, and they start at one and they start to cover it with dirt as they go, and it is truly disturbing. I mean, if you've ever seen pictures of the ditches that Native people were being thrown into from Wounded Knee, or the mass burials that the Jews experienced under Nazi control, this just, I mean, it just looks too much like it. It's so much like a modern day take on the idea of doing this kind of mass burial, and the idea that there's that many people who die that nobody cares about, and or that there's no way to to contact family members. I mean, that's sick. I mean, that's a culture that has broken down. That's a societal failure. And of course, the other thing that because of the amount of deaths that they've had at hospitals and in homes, and the amount of bodies that have been taken in by the coroner, they actually had to shorten the window. Normally, they would hold on to a body for such a period of time, and then if it wasn't claimed, then they'd be buried at Hart Island. But they had to shorten that window down to it's only a few days now, maybe a week, I don't know, but they've had to shorten that time period down. And I gotta tell you, and this isn't just a slam on New York City. I mean, what's a government to do? But what does it say about society that people can die and just nobody cares? I mean, no family. I mean, I realize that there's a large homeless population in every urban environment. We don't have it here on Native territory, by the way. Homelessness is an issue, at least within our communities, that I'm familiar with. And I know that there's some pretty rough places where Native people live, where Native people have fallen through the cracks in urban environments. But no, this whole idea that you could have this level or this volume of people dying in any society, in any culture, and have nobody claim the body. I mean, I don't think this is just about somebody not wanting to foot the bill for funeral expenses. I think it goes beyond that. But if it's that too, well, that's a further breakdown of societal issues. All right, hey, we're at the bottom there. We'll take a break and we'll come back and we'll get into it a little bit more. This is John Kane, and this is Let's Talk Native. All right, thanks for letting me catch my breath here and wet my whistle a little bit. I want to thank our sponsors for Let's Talk Native, Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses. I want to thank Grand River Enterprises and NWS and everybody else who has helped in the future or in the past, and hopefully those that will help us as we go forward. I've got a few individuals who help from time to time when they can. VJ and Steve come to mind from New Jersey, and I greatly appreciate. Look, it's great to have the guys who do something every week or every month. But it is such a pleasant surprise, especially now when stuff is, getting, things are, getting a little unusual, to have somebody, drop a check in the mail or whatever else. So, again, I can't say enough about how much I appreciate the folks that support what we do here. And obviously, we are not only doing our Let's Talk Native show here, which is on Tuesday and Saturday nights, but we're also doing our New York show out of our studio here. So that's it's just more that we're doing, and of course we've got to pay for services, and we've got to keep our equipment going. So without the support we get, financial support, we couldn't do it all. So I thank all of you. Now I also want to thank all of you who not only listen to the show, but that offer your comments and your questions, your critiques sometimes. I want to thank all of you who share the show, whether you share the Facebook live stream, or whether you share podcasts or the YouTube videos or whatever. I appreciate all of you guys helping to get the word out. Look, I know that some of what I'm saying on a show by show basis may be something you've heard before, but it may not be. And I try to offer a perspective that I think needs to be offered up because I'm not hearing it from anybody else, and I'm not trying just to be a shock jock or to be a contrarian or anything else. I really believe the things that I'm offering up here in terms of opinions, and I know that there's a lot of people who have grander conspiracies about this. My biggest complaint and my biggest caveat here is not that I think this whole thing is a hoax. I just think the whole thing has been downplayed so much. And I think because the numbers that we're seeing that are coming in globally are only based on numbers that come from people who are confirmed by a test, it doesn't give a true picture on how many people. Look, and I know so many people are saying, yeah, but look at what the flu killed last year. Or look what this flu did, or that flu did, or they're trying to make these comparisons where they're comparing a full year and a look back at that full year where they can really assess real numbers. I'm saying even today where in the United States where there's almost 40,000 people that have died. Those are 40,000 people who have died that have been confirmed either by a test or by an abundance of information associated with that death. I think when you look back at this, you're going to find out there were a lot more people who died. And there are people who died of COVID-19, and then there are people who died because of COVID-19. And there is a difference. Look, if you don't go to the hospital because the hospitals are overrun with COVID-19 victims, and so you die at home of a heart attack and without any symptoms. There's still a cause and effect there. And I'm not saying that you have to list COVID-19 as the cause of that heart attack, although it's the cause of many of them. I think there are a lot of people who are probably not seeking medical attention. There are surgeries that are being put off that are considered elective surgeries, but even elective surgeries sometimes can have time constraints to them. So I think when this gets looked back on, and keep in mind, the first case in the United States wasn't until late January. So when you look at how long, and the spread is real slow in the beginning. I mean, a lot of times when they start to measure the graphs on these things and they start to chart, they don't make a single plot until they have 100 cases. But if you look at this thing from when they finally reach 100 cases to now, the chart isn't pretty, folks, and it hasn't turned the corner. I mean, it may be leveling off a little, but it certainly isn't going down yet. And I know, Andrew Cuomo keeps saying, we're seeing reductions here, we're seeing reductions there. And then they get pressed on issues about, but how many deaths are you having that you're not characterizing? So then they had to, but if you look at the average over the last 11 days, it's over 2,000 people a day. And they had a few days that were below 2,000. They had one that they posted with 6,000 people because it was people that didn't get counted for the previous days. So when I see a low like today, so today is down a little bit. There's 1,800 deaths today. But it's a Saturday. I don't know that things are counted the same on the weekends. And, I know people are saying, this is an everyday thing. I get it. But I'll bet over the next couple of days that number's not going to stay that low. Especially when you start adding in some of the other numbers that are coming in different ways. Nursing home numbers, not just hospital numbers. So my concern is that this thing is being downplayed, and especially because, look, it's an election year. Donald Trump cannot ride this current wave into the election in November. He can't. I mean, it'd be a political suicide. So he's going to try to do something drastic. I don't think it's an accident that you had, maybe as many as a dozen protests across almost as many states today, demanding for the states to open up. This didn't happen by accident. There are some right wingers, and Trump's right there, that are going to be pushing for this stuff because they're going to try to get the economy rolling. They're thrilled to death that the stock market, started to jump back up on news that they have one drug that, that they haven't gone through any full clinical trials, but they think shows some promise. But but even that drug isn't something that's going to prevent or cure the vast majority. This is an intravenously administered drug that has shown some promise. It's not like it's cured everybody that they tried it on, and they haven't done any double-blind studies or anything. So, but the stock market is just looking for a reason for people to start. And look, the stock market it's like a rich man's casino. They buy and sell stuff just to make money. They look for a trend that when they buy, the value will go up so they can sell it again later. It's a ridiculous thing to base measuring an economy on. And when Trump tries to say that he had the greatest economy the United States has ever seen was on his watch, it doesn't account for the fact that you had the largest income and wealth disparity that ever existed in the United States. And you know what? And it may be among the largest income disparities that exist anywhere. So when I hear, somebody talk about the United States being the envy of the world, it doesn't have universal health care. It has, tremendous poverty. I had a couple of callers on my New York show this week said they could not believe that there are native territories that don't have running water. Well, you know what? There are non-native territories, communities that don't have running water. And then there's non-native communities who have running water that you can't drink and you can't bathe with. Flint, Michigan comes to mind. But native territories throughout the U.S. and Canada have some of the worst water on the planet. And of course, not everybody does. I mean, some people can waste water and not even think about it. But you always see these little memes where you show some little kid in a third world country, who's looking at somebody wasting water and thinking, and you just can't wrap his head around it. You don't have to go to a third world country to see that, to see somebody react that way. Part of the reason the Navajo are experiencing the massive amount of infections, and I got to be clear here, on a per capita basis, Navajo country is experiencing a higher rate of infection than any other states except for New York and New Jersey. I'm not saying the total number is higher, although they do have numbers that are higher than many states. But Navajo territory, they've got almost 1,200 cases, and they've got well over 40 deaths. That's a lot for a population. And again, people say, yeah, but there's 250,000 in Navajo. Not on Navajo territory, there isn't. There's probably only about 100,000 people in Navajo that live on their territory. So when we talk about that population, we're not talking about Navajo living in Los Angeles. We're talking about Navajo living on Navajo territory. I mean, that's a really large number for the percentage, for the population. And why is that number so high? I mean, the rest of New Mexico and Arizona, and the states that around that territory are experiencing this number, because native territory they barely have running water in some of those places. And now, why is that? It's because it is policy-driven poverty on most native territories. I mean, the few native territories that have managed to develop an economy are fortunate, like we are. That I guess fortunate because we at least have a non-native population that we can sell stuff to, so we can be develop an economy that relies more than just selling to ourselves, our own purchasing power. And even before there was casinos, but there's a lot of native territories that are not in a place that they have a large enough non-native population around them. And the crazy part is they do have some non-native population. And, one of the things the other things that Navajo experienced was when things started evaporating off of grocery store shelves, non-native people were coming onto Navajo territory and the very few places that Navajos can shop within their territories, and we're helping to clean out their shelves as well. That's why you're seeing some native territories that are shutting down and trying to limit the amount of non-native people that come onto the territories. It's not really about racism. It's not about xenophobia or nationalism. It's about just plain security. We have far more limited resources on our territories than the non-native people have off our territories. And so if the pickings look easy on our territories, then we become victims of that. But so when you talk about the income disparity, that and I'm not even just blaming Trump. Income disparity is something that every that's why we call them run like the Gaius. That's why we call these presidents town destroyers, because they enrichen the wealthiest, and they expand the level of poverty for everybody else. I mean, and when you came out of the 2008 recession, or whatever they call it, the meltdown in 2008, not everybody recovered. There were millions of people who lost their homes. And you know who most of the people who lost their homes were? The highest percentage were people of color. And you know what? Some people made lots of money. This is what they call carpetbaggers. The ones who see every opportunity to make a bunch of money. And look, there are people doing it now. And I'm not just talking about the guy who goes in and buys out every bottle of hand sanitizer and toilet paper off of a shelf. Yeah, there's those guys. But there are also people who are figuring out the best way. I mean, what was this? I saw the story about Ruth's Chris, the franchise steakhouse, the high-end steakhouse, and the amount of money, stimulus money they're getting. They're a company that was still turning a profit. So there's all of these examples of while some businesses, this is one of the things that Cuomo was blasting Trump for when they were having their row this week. He said, "Look, you're bailing out the airline industry, but you're not bailing out the states. I don't know how the states are going to manage through this. Their sales tax revenue has gone. Most states make their money off of sales tax revenue. I mean, even states that have a state income tax, like New York's, for instance, the counties, the municipalities, they rely heavily, not just on property taxes, but on sales tax revenue. And you know what? If the only thing people are shopping for is food in a grocery store, there's no sales tax on food. You're not going to make enough sales tax revenue off of toilet paper to fund the city of Buffalo or Albany or New York. And for all of this $2 trillion worth of stimulus money, none of that is earmarked for helping the states to balance their budgets. So, look, this thing's going to get uglier going forward. The last shoe hasn't dropped on this thing. And the fact is that while this thing is still cresting, I mean, think about this thing as a flood. That's like saying while the flood waters are there, you start moving back in. You don't move back in to your homes while you got 3 feet of water in the freaking house. If you move back at all. But that's what they're talking now. While that curve is at its highest peak, they want to talk about, well, let's go back to business as usual. And even if they're saying, well, no, we're going to do it slowly. But when do you start? And when these protests start happening, and they're all right-wing protests, and you've got a right-wing president sitting in the White House whose only concern is himself, he's going to let every one of these things be a self-motivator. And he's going to use these things to his advantage. Look, there is no way that you're going to convince me that the people closest to Trump or Trump himself are really that concerned about elderly dying in nursing homes. You know why they don't care? Because they don't contribute heavily to the economy. They don't. And even if they're wealthier elderly people, the sooner that money gets passed down to the next generation, the sooner that money goes into the economy. Because right now it's just sitting there. They're not productive, and they're a burden on the health systems of the United States. I know that there's some people putting a bug in Trump's ears. I think it was that Dr. Oz who said, look, if 2% of the children die because they go back to school, he made it sound like that was okay. Like that was an acceptable risk. For one thing, children aren't the ones at high risk, but there's no way in hell that anybody would sacrifice 2% of the children for the sake of the economy. But this is some of the moronic thoughts that you hear on Breitbart and on OAN and on Fox News. I don't even know why I mentioned the first two because nobody watches that crap. But Fox News. I mean, Fox News is still the number one network in a news network on cable television. Those morons, Sean Hannity and Tucker Carlson. I mean, I don't know. I can't think of the Ingrams woman who's starting to look more and more like Kellyanne Conway every single day. I mean, these people are nuts. Some of the crap that they say is just absurd. And even when they have a reasonable guest on, it's like that they're trying to get them to say something that they can twist around, and of course the better guests don't allow them to be. But there's I say it all the time. America deserved Donald Trump, and after 3.5 years of Trump, if the best the Democrats could put up is Joe Biden, then they're probably going to deserve another 4 years of Trump, or Trump light in Joe Biden. So the rest of us, we got to figure out how we survive this. And I'm less concerned about surviving COVID-19 than surviving the failure and the collapse of the United States. Not just the collapse of the economy. Again, I've talked about this before. There are some things that are unraveling at an alarming level. And I never even considered a pandemic as one of the contributing factors to this. But, like I said, I listened to Trump talk about China inflating their currency and just printing more money, as the United States is doing exactly that. and eventually it starts to crash the economy. You know, there aren't the controls in a country like the United States that where they can manipulate the economy as much as they can manipulate the numbers. You know, so they can manipulate all of the metrics that they use. But the people who are really living and who are experiencing this stuff know what they have to go through on a daily basis. Know how very little how short their money goes these days. That's, you know, it gets down to, you know, what we've talked about so many times on this show before this pandemic. The more and more we have to rely on what we do locally and what we do with each other and how we connect to each other. But I'll tell you, this is showing itself on a daily basis, how close to a real collapse the United States is entering into. And look, you see the failure. How's the election going to take place in the United States this year? I mean, I'm not voting anyway, but how's the election going to take place? You know, you've already seen the whole primary season go down the tubes. They don't have it worked out. You think in a country that is supposed to be so technologically advanced, they can't even figure out how to vote? I mean, it's kind of bizarre on a bunch of levels. And this is the reality that we're living in. And you know, so the whole idea of what the new normal is. Look, the old normal sucked. Let's not kid ourselves. The way things were before were terrible. And even the 1% who's lived so high on the hog over the last, you know, 4, 5, 6 presidents, they know that it's crashing down too. I mean, when you hear all of this stuff about, you know, these countries who have taken American jobs, no country came in and took American jobs. It was the wealthy elite of the United States who said, look, this isn't sustainable here. Americans actually want to get paid for the work that they do. You know, we got to get Mexicans to do this stuff. We got to get Chinese and Taiwanese and Filipinos to do this work. We got to get Vietnamese to do this work. We can't pay a living wage to Americans. I mean, no. I mean, So it's a system that has been unraveling for years. And so you get to the place where not only has the system been unraveling, but then you elect a moron like Donald Trump. And look, the likelihood is, you know, he probably won't get reelected because I don't know how he can survive what's happening with COVID-19. He probably won't get reelected. But I tell you, if he doesn't get reelected, it's only because of a pandemic that he doesn't get because if he had to run straight up against Joe Biden without this pandemic hanging over his head, I mean, to tell you, he'd win again. He probably won't, but he'd win again if it wasn't for this pandemic. And you know what? Joe Biden represents almost everything that Trump, you know, stood for as well. So this is going to be, no matter what happens in November. And right now, it seems like November is a long, long ways away. I mean, like I said, March may have seemed like the longest month in history. And when I see the people who are reacting right now to having to spend time with their families for a month, not for 6 months, but just for a month so far, and the fact that this whole stay-at-home order stuff is just unraveling at the level that it is. I mean, even in Florida, they open up a beach. I don't know of all of them, but the ones in Jack and the beach was packed. So I mean, you're gonna start to see a bit of a wave from some of this stuff. I mean, look, one meatpacking plant in South Dakota ends up, you know, infecting like 400 people, you know, almost immediately. That's how fast this thing is spreading. So I mean, we're gonna see how this thing plays out. But I got to tell you, anybody who thinks this is over because they think they've reached a flattened top of the curve, you don't understand what a curve is. It means that the flood is happening now. It doesn't mean that the flood waters have receded. So go out there and you protest for your freedom and, you know, and your liberty and your right to get your freaking hair cut. But don't go home to grandma. You know, unless you don't love grandma, you better not go home to that. So I don't know what else to say about you know, this. I mean, watching the number of protests, I mean, and of course, the media was eating it up. Now, I'm not just talking about Facebook. I mean, the media, the mainstream media. Man, we can't get some of the most obvious issues that that don't just impact Native people, but where we have stood up to these issues. We can't get coverage from it until there's blood. You know, until you got attack dogs ripping at flesh. You can't get anybody from the mainstream media to come check out what's happening on Native territories or what the issues that we're fighting against. But get a bunch of white people with Trump flags and Trump hats, you know, violating, you know, social distancing and stay at home and essential travel orders. Oh, every station on television on cable news was covering this. This is, you know, again, this is the sensationalism. And it's not because they're right, but when you get guys like Trump who can get away with saying something sensational and never really, I mean, look, I know people say he lies, but the media doesn't do an effective job highlighting just how wrong the statements he makes are. I know they do, but they do some. You know, and they don't. I mean, look, I think Trump is coming unraveled on a daily basis. I can't believe he's still doing a daily news conference. That's bizarre to me because he sucks at it. You know, and then when he wants to try to get into you know, a 12-hour pissing match with you know, with Andrew Cuomo, trust me, Cuomo eats Trump up on a daily basis with this stuff. And I'm not a Cuomo fan. I'm just saying, you know, Trump is a moron. I mean, he can't even complete a sentence, let alone complete a thought. Jake said he's like a cup. The last thing that's been thrown in the cup is the first thing that comes out of his mouth. He can't even rationalize the thought process. So I don't know. It's gonna be this whole thing is, and it's so related and relevant to the COVID-19 pandemic, because this is which is causing people to take a strange stance. Look, Trump denied this was even a thing. He called it a hoax, and then had to take it seriously. And he has moments of idiocy that show up when he starts talking about, well, the cure can't be worse than the disease, and you know, and then starts to back away, and then people reel him back in. But I guarantee, crowds of people start showing up on a daily basis in front of, especially if they're protesting some sort of Democrat control of a state. Trump's going to be all over it. He's going to try to win those people. He's going to try to win those states, and he's going to start trying to win them now, because he doesn't know when this thing gets better or if this thing gets better. It's his last ditch attempt. Like I said, mark my words. The first major crowd, you know, that public event that is legal or authorized is going to be a Trump rally. So anyway, I'll keep you posted on the numbers. We keep doing this. We'll be back here on Tuesday, and of course we do our show in New York on Thursdays from 3 to 5. That's a call-in show. Look, if you listen to our Let's Talk Native show and you would like to have better interaction with what I'm talking about here, tune us in on our Thursday show. We offer the number in New York, so you call into the studio in New York. And we're all patched through. We're connected by Skype. I'd love to hear from more of my Let's Talk Native listeners on my Let's Talk show in New York. So you know, tune us in. We're on Facebook Live, and you can check us out on WBAI.org. It streams live on their website as well. So, check us out on Thursday as well. So otherwise, we'll see you back here on Tuesday. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Yahweh.